because Stephen Peterson is my guest this afternoon. And let me tell you about Stephen Peterson. At the time of his retirement, he was the most experienced DEA street agent in the United States and one of the most decorated DEA agents in the agency's history, and he's been a special agent of the United States Department of Justice and the Drug Enforcement Administration for nearly 3 decades. Steve is currently Vice President of the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau, and I'm going to get him to tell you about that in just a moment. It's a network of retired DEA special agents and other topic-specific experts, and they provide high-quality training to nearly 85,000 professionals in the law enforcement community. Now, there's so much more I could say about Steve, and we're going to talk to him about it as this interview unfolds. But he is a specialist in this epidemic of Mexican black tar heroin, and I'm going to get him to tell you about that in just a moment. Steve, welcome to Freedom Friday today.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me. And if you could see me through the radio, you would see that I'm blushing after that introduction.
Okay, well, it is you I was talking about, right?
I had to look.
I know. Hey, but you are known as the Batman of DEA, right?
Brother, I am Batman. Yes.
You are Batman, okay. You know, that's so funny. I remember when my grandson was just a little boy, about 3 years old, and Batman was huge, and he had a little Batman cape flying around the house with it. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Papa, when I have this cape on, I am Batman." Oh my gosh, so funny. So you are Batman, huh?
I am Batman.
Well, listen, Steve, before we get into this Mexican black tar heroin, and that's, you know, Mexican black tar heroin for me and Brandon Big B, it's Reese's peanut butter cups.
Yeah. I understand.
Yeah, do you understand? I mean, we were eating some just before, and Brandon Big B, he says, this has got to be what Mexican black tar heroin is. He said, this has got to be it.
It's the closest to legalized crack you'll ever find, Reese's peanut butter.
Gotta be. Got to be. Hey, well, listen, tell us quickly, Steve, what about the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau? Where can people find out information about that, websites, et cetera, and tell us what it is.
Well, what it is, what the Speakers Bureau is a company we started up that provides training not only to law enforcement but also to corporate America on drugs in the workplace and legal issues, especially surrounding medical marijuana that you see now, money laundering, that kind of stuff, because there's a lot of laws and rules out there that seem to be being bent and broken as people try to get their proceeds from marijuana sales into the financial system.
Right.
So we do a lot of training on that.
Good.
But you can find us on the web being an ex-DEA guy, we're big into acronyms. So if you go to the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau or NLESB.org, you can find us there.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's what I wanted to know. The NLESB.org, National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau.org. Okay. Good deal. And we'll mention that again here before you leave us this afternoon. But listen, let's get into this. Just exactly what is, it's not Reese's peanut butter cups. We were making fun of that. But what is Mexican black tar heroin, and where does this heroin come from in Mexico? Tell us what that's all about.
Well, you know, when you think of heroin, at least somebody my age, when you think of heroin, you think of these junkies in the back alleys of New York, dying with a needle in their arm as they're shooting up a very dirty, disgusting drug that had a stigma to it. Well, times have changed, and heroin has evolved.
Right.
And it's becoming very, very popular. And the reason it's becoming so incredibly popular is that this country is not getting over. A wave has taken over the country on prescription pain medication.
Yeah.
And we've had a huge problem with that, especially on the East Coast, down in Florida and Kentucky, North Carolina, which is where I'm at. And as the prescription pain pills become unavailable, either the doctor won't write anymore, or the doctor gets arrested, or for whatever reason, you're not able to obtain it. By then, you've already developed a dependence on an opiate, because the pain pills are opiates.
Right.
And once you become dependent or addicted to an opiate, it's probably the most difficult addiction to break free of. Even those who get professional care, 83% of them fail rehab on the first try. So it's very difficult to break the addiction. So you have very little choices if you become dependent on an opiate prescription drug. You have to continue to feed that hunger, to feed that addiction. So as a person out there buying pain pills, you're faced with a choice. You can go to the black market and look for pain pills on the street. And pain pills on the street are going to sell roughly between $40 and $80 per pill.
Wow.
Well, how can you afford, if you're taking 5-10 pills a day, how do you afford that?
Right.
So your alternative, and it's not everybody's first choice, but there's no other way. This is where all streets lead to. Your alternative is to look at heroin, because heroin has become so cheap and so readily available that you can go out and buy it for anywhere from $4 to $12 a dosage unit.
Right.
So compare $4 to $80. Where do you think the addicts are going to go? They're going to go to the heroin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what is? That's an excellent understanding, and I appreciate it. But what is exactly? Why is it called Mexican black tar heroin? What's the deal with that?
Well, for many, many years, for generations, heroin comes from morphine, and morphine comes from the opium poppy. The opium poppy is only indigenous to certain parts of the world. Historically, it's been Southeast Asia and the Middle East, and in parts of South America. The Colombian cartels started dabbling in heroin back in the 90s. Well, actually, opium poppy also is indigenous to the Sierra Madre mountain range in Mexico. And in fact, in the 40s, the U.S. government really kind of induced the Mexican government to increase the opium poppy production in Mexico, because in World War II, we had a huge demand for opium, or for morphine. There was a huge shortage of morphine because of our soldiers in the war.
Right.
So the U.S. government really encouraged Mexico to step up production. When the war was over, the demand was greatly reduced for morphine.
Mm-hmm.
But the Mexican drug traffickers said, hey, well, we can find an alternative demand for this product. And they began converting the morphine into heroin.
All right, talk to us about that. What is this conversion? Is heroin then stronger than morphine, or less strong? Is cheaper, more expensive? I mean, tell us what that conversion is.
It is converted. It is converted over. Morphine is then converted into heroin, and it's done through a variety of chemical processes. But it's unlike Southeast Asian and the Middle East heroin. Instead of being a white crystalline substance, a white crystalline powder, the way they convert it in Mexico, it's not quite as refined, but it's more potent. So instead of having the white crystalline powder, the Mexican heroin is converted into almost like a brown sugar, or in many instances what we see in the Carolinas is almost a Tootsie Roll consistency, like a black tar, and hence the name, black tar heroin.
I got you.
And it's sold in dosage units about the size of a pencil eraser, typically wrapped up in colorful latex balloons that you'd make balloon animals out of for your kids.
Right. Wow.
And it's sold in balloons from anywhere, like I said, from $4 to $12 a shot.
Yeah, and one shot, one dose would last a person how long?
Well, it would depend on your dependency. Typical heroin users, they use about a balloon, at least one balloon every 4 hours. Wow. And some of them who have greater tolerance because they've been addicted, they've been using either a pain pill or heroin longer, they might take 2, 3, 4 balloons every 4 hours.
Good gracious! But you're saying that it's relatively dirt cheap compared to other drugs, and so you're looking at $4 a balloon, right?
Basically. Absolutely dirt cheap.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's why it's so popular. And then, of course, from a marketing perspective, the Mexican traffickers control it all. They can, unlike say cocaine, which is grown in Bolivia and Peru, and then harvested there, converted into cocaine. The Colombians then take control of it, ship it up they ship it up to Mexican traffickers today, but they used to ship it into the U.S. And then it's wholesaled here in 50, 100 kilo increments, and then it's as it makes its way down the supply chain, it passes from level to level to level.
Yeah.
Unlike that, Mexican traffickers, they control heroin from the poppy fields in the mountains.
Yeah.
All the way down to the actual distribution of the heroin to the addicts on the street in the U.S.
Wow.
They control it all. They do not wholesale it, so their profits are much, much greater.
Wow. Well, Stephen, listen, this is very informative. Now, what we're going to do, Steve, we're going to take a quick time out, and when we come back, I want to ask you, why is this so popular, this Mexican black tar heroin? Why is it so popular, particularly along the East Coast? And I know there's an important answer to that. Folks, you're listening to Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups. My guest this afternoon is Steve Peterson. When he retired a few years back, he was the most experienced DEA street agent in the United States, and working for the DEA and Department of Justice for almost 30 years. Steve is currently the Vice President of the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau, a network of retired DEA special agents and other topic-specific experts. You can find him and the website at nlesb.org. And, of course, that stands for National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau, nlesb.org. We're talking about this epidemic of Mexican black tar heroin, particularly along the East Coast in the United States. Steve, explain to us why the East Coast is such a popular destination for this heroin.
Well, there's a couple of reasons, Carl. One of the reasons is because we've had such an explosion and a problem with prescription pain medication. Mm-hmm. And it's a natural transgression or transition, I should say, from the prescription pain pills into the heroin. So that's one reason. Another reason is because in the city, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in Charlotte we have the honor of being the largest influx of black tar Mexican heroin in the U.S. east of the Mississippi River.
Wow. And why is that?
You would look at Charlotte and go, wait a minute, Charlotte? You know, you guys are a large banking city, second largest banking capital in the United States, second only to Wall Street. Why would you have a heroin problem? And the reason we have a heroin problem here is because there really is no one cartel, a Mexican drug cartel, that controls Charlotte. Cities like Charlotte and Nashville, Tennessee, and Columbus, Ohio, there's no one dominating or dominant Mexican cartel. So that allows all of them to come here and play. So they compete with each other. Plus, on average, we have a fairly professional citizenry. Yeah. And this is the typical heroin addict today are white males between the ages of 16 and 25.
Really? Now, see, that's shocking to me. And I was going to ask you, well, I guess that statistic's not shocking, but I thought maybe in answering the question you were going to go somewhere like because the East Coast, and particularly in the Southeast, contains an aging population that does not have access to the prescription pain meds, and perhaps they're turning to this. But you're saying it's a younger crowd that's involved.
Yes. Yes, it's a huge, much younger crowd, and the Mexican traffickers are targeting them specifically, and one of the reasons they're targeting that particular demographic is that when you look at white males between the ages of 16 and 25, most of them have got a car, most of them have a cell phone, and most of them have some spending money. Mm-hmm. So this is exactly what the Mexican traffickers want. I don't know if you want to say it's racial or it's an ethnic barrier. But they do not. The Mexican traffickers, they realize if they get caught with drugs, they'll get deported. Mm-hmm. But if they get caught with a gun and drugs, they're going to go to prison, and then they'll be deported. Mm-hmm. So they rarely carry guns, mm-hmm. and they want somebody to a trafficker, a harmless guy. Mm-hmm. So they stay out of the more crime-ridden neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They focus their distribution, actually, in the affluent parts of the city. Yeah. If I go to any public school in Charlotte, I'll find some heroin. But if I go to the affluent private schools, it's overflowing.
Yeah. So they're looking.
But because they're private schools, they don't want to talk about it.
Right. So they're looking for yuppies.
Exactly. Exactly. And they're finding them. And for whatever reason, it's because, I don't know if it's because of Hollywood and they publicize or they glamorize the use of these drugs, but it doesn't have the same fear that it did back in the 70s and 80s that heroin did. Right. And people feel, well, look, we can just smoke it, but you can't. You can smoke it, but before you know it, by smoking it, you're not going to get the same high, but you will develop an addiction. Yeah. And before you know it, your smoking will turn to injecting.
Right.
It always does.
Well, listen, we've got about 15 seconds or 20 seconds. Just tell folks, if you had a word to the wise, the dangers, the devastating effects, tell people what you want them to hear in these last 15, 20 seconds.
What I would tell people is pay attention to your families. Because in almost every instance that I've seen this drug affect families, mostly the parents of these younger adults who are involved, they're in complete denial. And some of them are so ashamed that they keep this a secret.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to get help, because only with professional help do you have any chance of battling this monster.
Thank you, Steve. We're slap out of time. That's Steve Peterson.